Hi, my name is Jordan. I am a special education teacher from the UK. I share my passion for everything communication, sensory regulation, and fun lesson ideas for my classroom of disabled pupils aged 4 to 11. Each week, I am joined by experts in the field, answering your questions and sharing our knowledge and experience working alongside our beautiful young people. Let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sensory Classroom podcast. My name is Jordan, and today I'm joined by Dr. Morgan, who has worked in education for 18 years in special education and also has a PhD in school and clinical psychology. Always has supported in schools, but then in 2021 has begun providing online support through Instagram and courses. Hello, Dr. Morgan.
Hey, you can just call me Morgan.
It feels wrong to not call you Dr. Morgan because it's such a huge achievement, honestly. When I was reading your bio, I just thought, oh my goodness, this woman is just such a powerhouse of knowledge. I have to get her on the podcast. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. And thank you.
Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit on your journey from, all those 18 years and how that has led you to your business, what it looks like today?
Sure. Do you want the short or the long version?
Whatever you prefer.
No, I don't. Sometimes people are like, you've done it all. How did you do all these things? And I don't feel like that. I feel like I'm learning something new every day, like multiple times a day. And when I look back, I think is when the journey is more clear. I had a job. My first career was in PR and marketing, which is so not relevant, but also oddly is. And I did that for a couple of years in New York, in the States, and then in Seattle, Washington. And I liked it, but it was not like fulfilling this core need, desire, purpose that I thought that I just knew that I had a purpose that was different than what I was doing. And I started volunteering at this house in Seattle. It's actually right by the airport. And it was for kids who were in the foster care system but could not be placed in family settings for whatever reason. And I got there and literally it's like, all of us working there under 25. Sometimes the kids that we're supporting are 18 and we're 21. We are slightly above their age and development, and we're in many ways responsible for so much of their care the way that a true parent would be. And I somehow found myself in this educational liaison, I'm using air quotes here, educational liaison role. I had no idea. I knew nothing about education at all. And I was going to individualized education plan meetings for these kids because they all had disabilities. And I'm quickly figuring out what a disability is and what constitutes a disability in different arenas, like in the medical model versus the school model. And I loved it. And so I decided to become a teacher. And I did that job for about a year. I had a really great boss in the marketing world at the time. We used to have bagels and coffee once a week, and his work was clearly his passion in life. And he was really keen on mentoring people into their passions. And I was talking to him about this center and working with these kids and all this stuff. And finally, I said, I don't think I'm supposed to do this work anymore. And he said, I don't think you are either. I never tell this story, but he goes, you're fired. Do you want to be fired now or in 6 months?
Wow,
And
amazing mentor.
yeah. And I was like, what? I've never been fired. Oh my goodness. And he's like, no. He's like, you're in you're bridging two worlds and I think you need help. And so I'm going to give you that push. And so I got my ducks in a row and I joined an organization to kind of expedite your license and get you into a master's program and teach full time while doing that. And so I moved to Hawaii and I taught there, and I ended up adopting 2 kids while I was there in what would be called a Hanai adoption. So it's not like I took them from their family. It was more like we integrated our lives. From there, it kind of snowballed, right? Like I was a classroom teacher, and then I was also raising these 2 kids as a bonus mom. And Then I got asked to start a school in Denver, and I started one school, and then I started another school. And then I felt like I had this weird set of knowledge. I had this special ed knowledge. This whole time I had been supporting these kids, I was recognizing that all these other things were happening in their lives that were really impacting them. And I felt like even there, yes, there was a disability, but like there was a lot that could be done to support that. But there was also this mental health component that was partly by being neurodivergent and it was partly by the way they're moving through the world and what they're experiencing. And that I wanted to know more about. And so that's where I went and I got my PhD. And I started in school psychology, but then expanded my training. And so that's where we are. And that's how I sit in the intersection of these kind of two spaces.
Amazing. God, you seem way too young to have all that experience. I'm so pleased to like absorb some of your knowledge right now. A past foster carer also, been a foster carer for 3 years in total, like in spaces. And yeah, I have a huge heart for it too. I feel like there's so much overlap because so often the children that need the most support and I have the most lacking support in the foster care system are the disabled and neurodivergent children. They're harder to place, honestly, but also some of the trauma that children face, it looks like neurodivergence. They're highly anxious or, yeah, have all sorts of different trauma responses that mean that they need extra support also. So there's kind of this weird overlap. And I feel like lots of people that are passionate about one would naturally be passionate about the other if they got the opportunity to be. Because, yeah, there is so much overlap. If you have the heart for one, you'll probably have the heart for the other. So it's really lovely to have a kindred spirit across the pond that I can align so much with my passions for both of those things. Who do you support now then? Because obviously that expands a huge range of children and need and experience. What does your kind of day to day, like, people you work with look like?
Yes, great question. I think my business kind of reflects my own personality. And also, I think I know too much now to be able to have a proper diagnosis, but I am 99.99999% sure that I have ADHD. I can think all the way back to my childhood, definitely before the age markers that we would need for determination. And I think that's reflected in my business. So we have two sides actually. We have Reach Learning Services, and those are for that's an educational service for kids who have primarily learning disabilities and level 1 autism, and they have trained educators that are then trained in like Orton Gillingham, which is the gold standard really in terms of reading intervention for dyslexia. They're in like a bunch of these different programs essentially that can support dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, so your kind of like core 3 learning disabilities in terms of reading, writing, and math. And then they support kids with auditory processing disorders and helping kids with strategies around that. And then they help kids with ADHD and kids with primarily level 1 autism. These are the kids that they self-describe being more impacted than any of the descriptors would indicate. A lot of times they're referred to as low support needs or, level 1 or high
Yeah,
functioning.
5 years ago, they would have been called Asperger's, which we
Yes,
don't use that
yes.
word anymore, that term anymore. It's autism, which is right, because exactly what you say, like, there is so much they're high maskers, they have just as prevalent sensory needs, and I often feel like I'm in a part of a special education classroom, but it's attached to a mainstream school, so lots of the level 1 autistics are actually just part of the mainstream setting, and I often think they struggle almost worse, like, harder than the kids in my class, because the kids in my class, there's a innocence there, there's an unawareness there of where they should be or where they're at, that they don't feel like they're missing out because they're just having the best time, and they are not aware enough of where they could be or where they should be. Whereas those with level 1 autism, there is an awareness there. There's awareness of there's loneliness there. It really does affect their mental health because they have a feeling of, well, I should have friends, or I should have a relationships, or I should be able to do all these things and I can't. And then that's where their low self-esteem comes in. And I feel like they really struggle. There's an awareness there of what they should or could be doing.
Mhm.
and yet they can't or
Yes.
find it more difficult. And that awareness, I think, makes it really, really difficult. And I almost hate that it's called level 1 to 3 because it makes it feel like the level 1 isn't so bad. And I think
Right.
they have a really tough time.
Yes. I mean, yes, we have so many kids that end up because they start in the Reach Learning Services. And then a lot of our level 1 kiddos, they'll then also see me because I oversee that side because I was a special ed teacher. I was a special ed director. I did a bunch of that work and I train them. I train all of the educators so that they have additional training in neurodivergent profiles and understanding and what could be going on for these kids from a social perspective, a sensory perspective. The idea almost that a lot of those disabilities have like dimmer switches and sometimes they look more present. They're more symptomatic if we're using like that terminology. But sometimes it just feels a lot, their day feels a lot heavier. Their needs feel a lot heavier. And then other days they're turned down really low. And that can also mess with yourself too. If you're like, I could do this yesterday, why can't I do this today? That can be such a hard place to be because
Them and their teachers and their parents, there must be such high expectations on them at all times because they sometimes can do these things.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
right, it depends on the environment, how they're feeling in their body, what has happened yesterday, what kind of sleep they've had, all of these things. But then to have the same high expectations on them all the time must be so difficult.
So difficult because by definition, their disabilities are dynamic. They don't show up the same way every day. And then when you're little, you don't have language for that. And in fact, I'm in my 40s and I didn't have language for that until like 3 years ago. And I would argue that I have more knowledge, more, and I should have, here I am shitting on myself, but like I should have air quotes, like should have known that. And I still didn't. So then we're expecting our kids to. I don't think that's a fair ask. But what is happening is that these kids are then wanting to perform in a neurotypical way most of the time. They're not understanding the ebb and flow of having a dynamic disability that shifts from time to time based upon all these things that you just mentioned. So then what they hear is that that they were lazy that day, that they're not being motivated, that they're not trying hard enough, that they need to, I don't know if the language is the same, but we've got like locking in as like a major phrase here. Like they just need to lock in, they need to really focus, and they internalize that narrative as something that is wrong with them, not recognizing that it's literally part of a core component of that disability and that we really want to understand our own profiles because mine's going to be different from somebody else's, right? And being able to figure out what you need in any given moments. A lot of our kids, they'll be either engage with Reach Learning Services for academic support from somebody who deeply understands that, right? And starts to talk about things like, hey, where's your energy level today? Hey, where's your social battery today? And then talking about, well, what do you need? Do you need an accommodation here? Do we need to shift the way we work today? Do we need to do like a dance party here at the beginning? And the part of the reason that we're doing that is, yes, to teach them for sure. We want to be able to help teach them. But second, I would really like for that to be a narrative that they start to also say to themselves, what do I need today? Where am I at? Essentially, what accommodation would support me best right now to get whatever I really need to get done? Like, I don't always have to walk in at 100%. That's unrealistic. None of us are walking in every aspect of our day giving 100%. Like, we don't have it to give.
Yeah.
And so we want our kids to have that.
It shouldn't be the expectation on them that they put on themselves, and it shouldn't be the expectation that others put on them. Yeah.
But I think the dynamic nature of it is what makes it particularly hard. I don't think any parent or teacher is walking around wanting to instill this narrative that essentially can impact self-esteem and impact anxiety and depression. They don't want to be doing that, but it's that they don't know. They don't understand the variability that can happen even within a day, let alone the course of a week, a month, a year.
Yes, definitely. And if their children are able to vocalize that and explain that, then that will only help others to understand where they're at, won't it? Is there a mix of females and males and how that presents itself within Reach?
Yes, absolutely. We have Gosh, we have a lot more executive functioning that's happened post pandemic. I have a whole wondering about that. Much to our previous part of our conversation, we're just seeing tons and tons of kids diagnosed with ADHD. And I have some trepidation about that because the whole world experienced a trauma and every country responded in its own way. But it was also like, no matter where you lived in the world, it was probably something you had never experienced before. And so and nobody knew. There's a lot of pieces to that that are kind of like a global trauma. And I'm a little apprehensive on if all of these diagnoses are actually ADHD or if these are kids that were in a stage of development and it was shifted, it was arrested, it was paused and impacted pretty significantly for depending upon where you are, 6 months, a year, 2 years. And if what we're seeing is actually a nervous response, a trauma response that is making you more hypervigilant and looking like ADHD. I don't know, but I find it odd. And I think that it would be worth studying because I would hedge to bet that there's something else in the mix and that not all of these kids actually have ADHD.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I also think that it's worth considering that if they are high maskers and they've been at school for that long, and then COVID gave them the opportunity to unwind, unmask, to rethink their bodies, to eat when they want, go to the toilet when they want, to move when they want, and then they had to go back into the school system, they're going to really struggle with that too. So they were always ADHD. Maybe, I'm just being devil's advocate, but maybe they were ADHD, but they were high maskers, fawners, they wanted to please. Their interoception was kind of off, so they didn't listen to their bodies because they would get told off, that would be seen as bad. Whereas at home, I can move when I want, I can go outside, I can have a drink when I want. And all of a sudden they started listening to their body, which is
Mhm.
awesome. That's what we want. That's what in special education we celebrate, right?
Yes,
But
absolutely.
them and having the same expectations that they did before COVID, but now they know their body so much better and they know they need to move and they know that what their body needs and they're having to kind of unlearn that must be really difficult. And I can imagine that looks like ADHD.
Great point. It definitely goes both ways. There are also kids where I'm like, how on earth did we get this far? And it's often your high maskers and your kids that are your fawners, your high performers, your perfectionistic kids that are really seeking to please. Definitely there was a lot of that.
We've seen
Gosh.
a massive increase in homeschooling since COVID.
Same.
Especially neurodivergent children at all ages, actually. And I think parents just realize, like, gosh, you were so stressed. You were an absolute shell of yourself when you were
Yes.
in the school system. And I love this version of you. I love that you're more confident, exploring yourself, exploring what you're interested in. You've got your spark back. And I think lots of parents saw that and don't want to send their kids back into school. And gosh, it's a luxury to homeschool that so many parents don't have. But I can totally see why, if you can do that, that you would make that choice, honestly.
Absolutely. I also see homeschool pods here, and sometimes they've hired a teacher and it's several families that have gotten together. Yeah, there's some really interesting ways of supporting kids that have come out of the pandemic. I'm like, man, whatever works. If it, I say this all the time. If it works for your kid, it works, right? If it works for you, it works. I've done some support in schools because I do a lot on helping teachers integrate. This is funny. This is like none of the stuff that I sent you for us to talk about, but
It's always fun. I love it.
me too. I'm like, now I'm just nerding out on teaching. But I do a lot of support in schools where I go in and I do professional development in schools all over. But I also, because I was a teacher, right? So I'm not a psychologist coming in and asking you to do all of these things and not understanding the realities of the classroom, right? I've been in the classroom for a
It's really,
long time.
yeah.
Yeah. And so I talk a lot with teachers and help them integrate social and emotional work into the academics because I really think that that is where the work is. It's not about doing 20 minutes and checking in on a mood meter and then put that away and now we're on to math. It's really about recognizing like, where am I at today? Do I need something right now to be able to persevere through this? And man, am I going to need a break? Do I need a drink of water? There might be some tough things in here. Like I hate having to erase when I didn't do the addition right. And that makes me so angry. If that happens, that anticipatory thinking, or if that that happens, like, how am I gonna manage that frustration? That's what we really want our kids doing.
It needs to be embedded in everything. You are it's music to my ears. You've reminded me of an argument I once had with an old deputy head, um, that I worked with for 10 years, and she wanted me to replace one of my we call them PSED lessons, it's like personal, social, emotional development lessons,
Mhm.
with an English or a maths. And I was
Yeah.
like, "No, I'm not doing that. We've already got so much English and maths, and this is the most important lesson they learn. There is no point them learning how to say, 'I want a bus ticket,' or be able to work out the change for their bus ticket if they can't even get on the bus in the first place. Like, they need to have the confidence and the knowledge of, like, the world to be able to access and wait for the bus and get on the bus and feel confident enough to be able to communicate what they want and know what they want and all of those things and social and everything. Like, they can't what's the point in English and maths if they can't do that? Be regulated enough to leave the house, all of those things. So, yeah, you're saying music to my ears that I've been fighting this for a very long time. But yeah, I totally agree that those kind of social skills, that regulation skills, knowing your own body and being grounded in yourself is the fundamentals of everything. It has to come first.
Yes. Yes. It really, really does. And it's interesting because I've been doing that work since 2016, 2017, and the stress levels of teachers in the years, again, 2022 forward, I think has just been really, really high. And I think that, I don't know, again, this is an assumption on my part or a wondering, actually, even more than an assumption. I wonder if so many of our teachers and people in other professions as well, but I feel like teachers just get a heavy load in a lot of ways. They didn't have time to process everything. And then they came back into the classrooms and felt a sense of urgency. They felt like kids were behind. They felt like they owed it to try and like catch them up. I've heard that from a lot of teachers. And in that, they sometimes, not all the time by any means, I think that they have been so worried about the academic performance for kids and getting them back up to grade level or closer to grade level that they have forgot about some of like typical development factors. Like second graders should be yapping all the time and you should be like, will they just be quiet for a minute? Like, and that's what we would expect from that age group. So, but I'll be in a classroom and they're like, they just talk so much. We're like, actually, we want them to talk about how we want them to talk, and give them the space to talk. And can you shift your classroom expectations so that they have more voice and agency? And, but I think what in some cases, what I have seen happen is that there's a lot of anxiety, tension, stress for those teachers. And so a natural response for a lot of people in that situation is to try and retake back control, which means that they take agency from kids, again, unintentionally. They're not trying to do that. They're just, their nervous systems are, just vibrating and you can
Yeah,
feel
and then also finances. I don't know if America's had the same problem, but since COVID, school budgets have absolutely been thrashed. So all the support aides, I know you call them paraprofessionals, we call them teaching assistants, has been slashed, like the budget for that. So there's way less adults to support you. So the teachers are more on their own than ever, with needs in their class more diverse and more complex than ever. It's kind of a recipe that for no wonder,
yes,
this is happening,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah, yep, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
then what is the answer? I suppose a good question to ask you is, what are some things that if you walk into a class you would want to see that are accessible, easily attainable, that are just good practice for all children, I suppose?
I would want to see real regulation options for kids that are varied. And I say real meaning that it's not just something on a wall to refer to. That could be different seating options. It could be, having a space for standing or walking in the back if you wanted to do that. It could be if you needed, if depending upon age ranges and things like that, different things to wait on you. If you're in secondary school, like high school, being able to wear an AirPod, but not both. You need to be able to listen. But if you like, I have kids that I work with that they're like, I put my hood up because I just need to drown out the world a little bit. And it actually helps them to focus in on the teacher or what they're the work that they're doing. Maybe they'll listen, and then when it's time to do the actual schoolwork, they put their hood up and they go. The teachers and spaces have an understanding for those different kinds of needs. And then the other one that I would say are thinking frames. So ways for kids to think through what their needs may be. Because a lot of times we have things that say, like, identify your feeling or this or that. But here's the deal, if you are in any type of dysregulated state or you are dysregulating, the prefrontal cortex is the first part of your brain that goes offline. Well, that's your decision making. That's your good decision making, right? So if you don't have something external that you can look at that says, do this, think about this, like you are decreasing the likelihood of being able to access those skills because the actual mechanism that would do that is is offline. So making sure that kids have a way to process that in real time is really helpful. Choices in that process are helpful too, because when a kid is making even just small choices, am I going to sit or am I going to stand? Am I going to, am I going to grab this or am I going to grab that? It's a little bit of an art form here. You don't want too many choices, but you do want some, because when they do make those choices, it kind of like just crawls their prefrontal cortex back online by just making even small decisions.
Could it be like like a way of making that easier would be with visuals rather than spoken choices? So you could be showing the photos of the things, or you could be showing the actual objects
Mhm.
so that they don't have to process what you're asking them, but they can just see the 2 and make the choice. That's really interesting. I haven't heard of that before, that you're kind of wanting to creep in that, yeah, that those choices. It makes so much sense. I also hear so much that, oh, they know all the emotions. They can say happy and sad and angry, and they can move all the things, but they just don't do it when they're feeling it. And you explained beautifully why that would be, because they just don't have access to that part of their
Right.
brain when they're dysregulated. So I suppose,
Yes.
would you have stuff ready to go and then to offer them when they're feeling that? Or, how would you support the child to make those kind of helpful things accessible to them in that moment when they're feeling it or when they're bubbling up?
Yes. So I would actually back up and I would teach it when everybody
Mm,
is regulated, right? Or the vast majority of kids are regulated.
yeah.
And go through and have them, if you have sensory materials that, or different things that they can use, let the kids try them. If you are doing a 20-minute lesson or something, this to me would be a golden opportunity in that is, go through that framework, practice it together, take out some of the tools, use them, rate them. I would want a kid to be like this. Like one of the first questions I would ask, especially if they're third graders or older, I would say, or is it 8 or older, I would say, which one do you absolutely not like? Because nobody asked them that, right? And so starting with that one, like, yeah, this is not for me. Great. Well, we're not going to use that one, right? That's probably not going to be some of your go-tos. Which ones feel really good? Which one do you maybe you might not know the feeling yet in your body, but you might go, right? And then we can talk about how that means that there's something that's soothing to your brain, your body, about that tool. So a lot of times I use gestures at first with kids and actually even young adults too, because we sometimes we know intellectually words, but we don't know how they feel. And so sometimes using a gesture that mimics how people respond when they're feeling a certain emotion can actually help them tap into that a little bit better. Um,
That's in
so I would do that. I would teach it to all kids, and then I would have them have their own plan where they're like, these are my top tools, where they just have that available to them. Obviously, I'm talking more probably elementary primarily, just in terms of
Makes sense though. I feel
Mhm.
like for my learners are kind of cognitively age 4 and below, like 0 to 4. But I feel like by having the stuff out and seeing what they gravitate towards, adults could still build an idea of what they like, what helps them, what they avoid. Might take a little bit longer, but through observation, you could kind of still build that kind of repertoire, that kind of profile of what supports the child. And to have it written down, to have it available to people that come into the room would be so helpful.
Mhm. Yes, yes. The other thing that I would say is we And I do this too. When I am not at my best, I revert back to previous learnings, right? And previous behaviors, and everybody does. And I definitely did this in my classroom for a long time until I learned a different way where I would when I would see the first sign of dysregulation, which I don't think I even knew that word at the time, to be really honest. I would I would often say I would see that something was happening and I would wait and I would see if the kid handled it on their own, and I was viewing it as a behavior, and I was kind of like watching where this behavior is going to go. Were they going to get it under control was essentially what I was thinking, or are they going to lose it? Like, where is this going to go?
Prevention, yeah, okay, yeah.
And I know a lot of teachers now that do the exact same thing that I did. And so they wait. And I would actually suggest the opposite. So you don't even have to know what happened. If somebody gets louder and bigger, right? Or smaller and quieter than their typical baseline, I'm going to just go check in with that kid or that young adult then, right? And if they don't want to talk to me, that's fine. That's totally fine. But when we talk about helping people build new habits and new behaviors, the earlier we intervene, the earlier we check in with them, the earlier we remind them of this flow chart and this pathway through and forward, the more likely they are to be able to access it. Because the further dysregulated they get, they have less language accessible. So if you start talking to them, you can actually make it worse, right? Because that language centers are also going offline, or they're shifting. If they are older and they have language, they can get accusatory. This is where you hear kids say, like, I'm going to get you fired, right? And they get real threatening in their language. And that's a defense mechanism that comes as their language essentially lessens. And it's part of that fight or flight response. So being able to intervene earlier is usually helpful. And I will, when I've gone in and co-taught with teachers, modeled lessons, because I've gone in and co-taught several lessons with them, whatever they're teaching. I just go in and I kind of model alongside them. And I will tell the kids right away, hey, did you know that when people are kind of starting to get dysregulated, and I have explained what that is, that all humans, we have the same tendency as almost every other animal, which is that we get bigger and louder, and I'll have everybody go, right? And then I'll be like, no, they get smaller and quieter. And and then we have them kind of like tuck. And then I ask them to give examples of how that usually sounds for them, if they can think of one when they get bigger and louder. And so then I always give an example of me being like, Mom, you packed what for lunch, or whatever it is, or Dad, please, Loney again. I was like,
Which
that's
normalizes it, right? It's not bad to be angry, and I think that's what this is undoing, right? It's making it so okay. It is
yeah,
okay. You just have
yeah,
to do this and this to stay safe or keep your body safe or to stop, like, so that you don't get hurt or so others don't get hurt.
right.
It's not the feeling that's the bad thing, it's at all. It's
Yeah.
how we manage that, and we can support you to do that. When you said you intervene early, I love that. What does that look like, sound like? What does that mean when you're saying you're seeing a child that's getting a little bit louder, a little bit bigger, or maybe a bit quieter than their baseline, and you intervene?
Mhm.
Yeah, what is that?
Yes, usually it's really, really simple, but I make sure to shift my register into a casual register. So and if I think most teach myself as a teacher and as a psychologist, I have a tendency to shift into the register that I'm in now. And so if I have a kid who is dysregulated, I have a certain register that I tend to operate in. And I think most of us do, especially when we're on for work or whatever it is. And so, um, and it tends to be a little bit higher, and for me, it tends to be a little bit higher, a little bit clipped. And so when I have a kid who is dysregulating, I will really purposely switch into a casual register. And so I'll go over and I'll say, "Hey, is something going on?" And I really tried that. And I tried to make it, I don't want to assume what's going on, or I'll say like, "Hey, it seems like something's up."
Yeah, so it's not accusatory, it's not a demand, it's not pressure, but it's kind of like nuance, like, "Something good?"
Mhm.
Like, it's like, you're not giving them the answer, you're not, like, saying something's wrong, you're just giving them the opportunity to
Mhm.
day and to maybe just to recognize that in themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes kids are like, they'll recognize it right away, and sometimes they'll say something along the lines of like, no, everything's fine, and I'm like, okay, I'm just checking in because I noticed that it seems like something changed. And if you want to talk about it, you can. And then if they don't, then I'll say, you can also check out one of your tools. Which one do you really like again? And immediately what I'm doing is I'm giving them the choice. I'm asking them a question. I'm seeing if they can answer me. Because if they can answer me, there's a really good chance that they'll probably opt into that tool. If they can't and they say something like, leave me alone, or if they are really agitated and they curse, or something like that, then I know that that kid is more dysregulated and I might then make a different decision. Right? If I know this kid, I might say and I worked in behavioral classrooms for a long time. So I might my first thought is like, do I need to clear space for this kid to make sure that this kid is safe and everyone else is safe around them? That's usually my first thought. And that's what I'm assessing for. And how do I do that in a way that means that this kid is also protected, that whatever they're experiencing is not on display for everybody else.
Yeah, and they're not like the bad kid too, right? Like,
Right.
"Oh, we had to leave our classroom because he or she did this." It's like, no, that we also don't want to build that narrative either, do we? We want to give them privacy to be able to co-regulate, ground themselves, but also manage that kind of peer-to-peer judgment too, because you can train the staff team as much as you like, but there's also that peer-to-peer training that is needed, right?
Yeah.
That
Yes.
obviously starts with the adults too, but it's just there's so much to manage within
Yeah.
this situation, right? To try and combat all possible means of low self-esteem, shame, and all of those other things that you're kind of trying to battle.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then you're going into that situation. And as you know that kid, then you're kind of running through your kind of mental protocols, right? When I was a teacher in those positions, we often would meet and we would talk through, how are we going to support this kid? Often, if we could, we would bring the kid into the conversation because I don't want to talk about a kid without their knowledge and without them having the right to the information. If we're talking about you, you have the right to the information.
That's so respectful, and it gives them an opportunity also to feel seen and heard. I was certainly a child that was would have been troubled, I suppose, when I was that kind of age, primary. And I think ultimately for me, just being heard and seen and giving opportunities to regulate or, in the way that I wanted to would have helped me feel so seen and validated that actually I think it would have eased anything that I was anything big that would have ever happened because all I really wanted was to feel seen and heard and understood. That really ultimately, when it comes down to everything that I was feeling,
Mhm.
just you doing that, it doesn't take away the big things, but
Mhm.
just you saying including them in the conversation, giving them autonomy, helping them to feel seen and heard, nipping the little thing, when it's still small and making sure that you tap in as soon as you notice it. All of those things are so accessible to everybody. It doesn't cost anything. All children will benefit from it, whether they've got a diagnosis, neurodivergent or not.
Right.
Every child can go through something in the morning and they need to feel seen or heard or need some extra support.
Mhm.
I love all of these things and I love how accessible they are. The fact that they don't cost anything, that they are accessible for one teacher in the room when you've got 30 plus children, you can do that. If you know your children, if
Yes.
you have had those conversations before, if you've taken the time to learn their profile and what works for them. And I guess that's the point, right? It comes in that foundation right at the start of the year.
Yes, and it can also be repaired. I really like a process that we call 5 before feedback, and I use it in my clinical practice and I use it with my educators in regional learning services because I have Dr. Morgan Beidleman, that's my private mental health practice, and then I have regional learning services. And we use this strategy in both places, which is 5 before feedback, which means I know 5 relevant, recent, and important to the kid pieces of information. Doesn't mean that I know their grades. It doesn't mean that I know how many people they live with in their home. It means that I know that they, they have two meals that they like, and it's mac and cheese or spaghetti with meatballs, not ground beef meatballs. It's knowing those things about a kid that are really important. And we think that they have to be these long conversations, but really, if we think about how rapport is built with anybody, aside from maybe a podcast when you're sitting down and you're like, here we go. Like in most normal settings, you don't sit down with a coworker and have these really long conversations and build rapport and intimacy in that way, right? It's in all of these little moments over time, right? And so the real way that you get to know somebody is by talking to them in the hallway, by recognizing that they, hey, did you get new shoes? Right? It's about listening to something that they say, and you're just waiting, kind of like gathering information about them. And also, you can tell things about you too, as long as it's appropriate, right? But like, we don't have to be these just kind of like cyborg.
Robot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and our kids, they can smell that. They don't want that. They want a real person. And so, if you know 5 relevant, recent, and important pieces of information about somebody, then you're in a pretty good place to be able to build from there. And there's lots of ways to assess that. If you have a small group of kids that you're working with, see if you can jot down 5 things. If you have a classroom of kids, think about, if when you write the list, think about the person at the beginning or the person at the end, because they might be the person who's most triggering to you and you don't have that strong of a relationship with, or maybe they're at the end, and then try and go build it with them. I also do it in my clinical practice too. Sometimes I'll be like, okay, I know the trauma, right? I know the trauma history, but do I know what they did last weekend? That's important too.
Yeah. Yeah, because otherwise they're not going to trust you or have that relationship with you to trust you with their big feelings or trust you with their all sorts of things. I think any adult in a position of authority, whether you're a teacher or a senior leadership team or run a sports team or anything, I think that's
Mhm.
such great advice. And gosh, if any adult that worked with children did work like that,
Mhm.
God, what a difference that would be. Like,
Yeah.
that's the kind of education system that I wanna see and I wanna work in. I've always prided myself that I have no idea what the children's levels are, and sometimes not even their diagnosis, I'd have to look it up, but I do know, like, what team their dad supports in football or what their pet's name is or, yeah, their favorite texture or their favorite food or whatever. I know what
Mhm.
their random eclectic phrases mean, and I've always
Mhm.
prided myself on that, but that's that, isn't it? In, like, a little way. It's
Yeah.
knowing them and their soul rather than what's on paper, and it takes commitment to the person, and there's certainly children that I can do that easier with than others, and I think they're exactly the people that you need to be just spending more time with, and maybe talking to your team, "Let's all write down the children that we always, like, don't know as well, and let's just work with those this week. Let's just, like," and this week is all about just building that relationship with them. And I wonder if it's the same kids. I wonder if all of us would say, "Actually, do you know what? We're really struggling with the relationship with this child." And
Mhm.
imagine how that feels for that child to
Right,
not
to
have.
come into this building, right. Come into this building and no adult can do a 5 before feedback for me?
And I bet that happens.
Yeah.
And I bet they feel it without even realizing it. I bet they feel it, and they might even feel it at home too. Maybe
Mhm.
because
Right.
it's of their diagnosis or whatever, that it may be harder to get that information from or harder to build a relationship with. They've got these barriers up. That doesn't mean we
Mhm.
don't do it. And I think that's just a really beautiful reminder and kind of homework, I suppose, for me for this week of really thinking about, yeah, I have this great relationship with, 80% of my class, but what about that 20%? They're worthy too. And I guess I don't know if parents would they listen to this podcast and think the same, that they know some of their children better than others and maybe have a more open relationship with some of their children than others and maybe really listen to that and think about ways of that they could utilize now they're thinking about it. I'm like, "Okay, well, how can we do about it then?"
Yes, I mean, I'll speak for myself as a parent. I feel like in those like middle high school years, because my kids are now in 27 and 28. And so, granted, I was also very young when I was raising them. I was raising them as teenagers and I was in my early 20s, and I felt like I definitely got into this space, this rut as a parent where most of our conversations were, did you do your homework? Is your bag packed? Where's that homework assignment? Is it crumpled at the bottom of your backpack? Those kind of things. Very, very kind of both kind of task oriented and achievement oriented in a lot of ways. And
Pressure, a lot of demands.
yes, and there's time and place for that for sure. That's part of our job as parents, and I think a regret that I have is that I felt like I felt like once I had done that, and probably this is partly because of how young I was like, "Oh, I did my job." Like, "Yay."
You did. You did.
Yeah.
Ultimately, like,
Yeah.
they were safe, they were in school, they did what they had to do, like, ultimately, that is your responsibility, but there's more than that. There's more satisfaction than that, isn't there, with the
Yes.
other stuff, the
Yes.
extra stuff. It's seen as extra, but actually it's the foundation stuff.
Right, right. And so I worked really hard to shift that because I basically, before I had language of 5 before feedback, I did not have 5 before feedback with my own kids. I knew their grades. I knew which things they hadn't turned in. I knew what days they had football practice, but I didn't know the girl that they liked, and I didn't know what their favorite shows were, and I didn't know why they thought their science teacher was so annoying, or like whatever it was.
It's an
Yeah.
interest, isn't it? Again, it's helping them feel seen and heard and worthy, and then maybe they'll be more interested in understanding of you. And how satisfying is that as a parent or a teacher or an adult in their life to have that reciprocal relationship with a child, especially a teenager, let's face it. It's hard to get reciprocal anything from a teenager.
Yeah.
But it starts with us, doesn't it? It starts with us being interested. Maybe we listen to their album that they're playing on repeat, even though we don't really like it, but we're listening to it because we're like, well, what is it about this that's so interesting? Or maybe we're testing out a stim that one of our high support needs students like. What is it about this that they love so much? It's not something I would do naturally, but that doesn't mean that we can't be experimenting with it and intrigued by it and interested, ultimately, I suppose.
Yes. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Minecraft, but man, do I know a lot about it now.
Isn't it? It's really important to them, and I feel like when you do talk about obsidian, their eyes light up, doesn't it? And I love that, and it feels good, doesn't it, when you have a little fact? Yeah, we had a boy who was, year 6 actually, and, he was really, really into, like, certain animals, and I would go home and I'd research about the animal, and when I came in with a new fact that he didn't know, like, his eyes would just light up because he liked to know the fact, certainly, I think it was more than that. He liked to know that I was thinking of him, even away from the class. And it's that, isn't it? It's those extra that doesn't take much, it doesn't cost much, but it's a genuine interest in them and their interests and what they enjoy.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And it meant that when he was dysregulated, he trusted me because 'cause we'd already built that relationship.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. I think when I was in the classroom, I would have we would teach your core subject and then you'd switch. So I was reading and writing and social studies, and then somebody else was math and science, and we'd have half day, and then switch. And a lot of times the kids would come back to my room if they were dysregulated. And it was actually also something that the teacher and I had worked out because she was like, I don't really understand what's going on over there. But if it works, great. Then they can just, and I was like, I don't care. They can come in and go back and forth. And like, I didn't have a sensory bin. I didn't have, like, this was almost 20 years ago. Like, that was not on the radar. But I have beanbag chairs in my room. I hated the overhead lightings for myself, so I never had them on. We had lamps all over the room. I'm a tea drinker. We had a kettle in my classroom, and there was tea. And I was like, well, if I'm drinking, you can drink tea. So we always had all of those. We had a refrigerator that had tortillas and cheese. You could make a quesadilla for yourself. There was all of these ways that now I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
I get it.
Yeah. You were ahead of the curve and you didn't even know why.
No clue why. Well, in reality, I was doing things that made me want to
Yeah.
spend 9 hours in that room, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And yeah, I guess that is the foundations, right? We are adults. If we're, as a teacher, feeling like we need to pace and move around when we're talking, well, maybe that's a reasonable adjustment to offer your students. Or if we're needing a break for 15 minutes in the morning and a sit down and a hot drink, maybe that's something that your students do. It's like almost remembering that we're all human and like looking at yourself and feeling what you need and
Yes.
then offering that to your students. We become blind to it though. I've noticed that since naming emotions in myself, so modeling that for my students, I'm much more aware of what I'm feeling. And I realized how not aware I was before we started doing that. So like,
Yes.
oh, I'm feeling blue. Like, God, yeah, I am feeling blue. Like I need to pick me up. And before I
Mhm.
wouldn't have even kind of really acknowledged it. I'd have just kind of tried to push it down. But yeah, it's interesting how much we try and ignore and we're masking as adults and then therefore asking them to also.
Yes. Yes, yes. Yeah, I mean, going back all the way to kind of the beginning, when we were talking about level 1 autism and, some of those profiles, like those can it can be so hard because the regulation needs can be so intense because they are high masking, right? And a lot of times they don't even realize what's been going on for them because they weren't diagnosed early, they missed early intervention in supports in a lot of ways. They didn't get a lot of the even like the sensory experiences and the practice with those things because either they were so high masking, right? Or they were at, I hear this a lot too, where they were at school, but then at home they would fall apart. And so then people were brought in from a behaviorism perspective to try and like, you know, essentially reward and train the behavior, like around the behavior. And in reality, a lot of those kids probably needed sensory swings and and these different types of like jumping on a trampoline and like all of these things that would have soothed their nervous systems a lot more. And so they are so I think they have a lot of anxiety and they're just kind of like anxious. They're little like I mean I know I just said that, but their bodies, like you can see how much tension that they're holding in their bodies at all times, and it can sometimes come out in I have a lot of teenagers and young adults who bite their nails, who pull their hair, and a lot of it is stemming from unmet needs over years that are kind of like pushed out in other ways now. And that can be really, really hard as well because then they don't like the result of that. I have a couple of people that I work with, they have like really bloody fingers, and we're like, we got to deal with these needs that we have here because that is not helping you. That is, and they're like, well, could we wear gloves or could we do this or that? Yes, for the immediate, right? To make sure that this doesn't get infected and that you're not causing more harm. And also, let's also address this underlying
Yeah,
root.
let's find a way of you meeting whatever need that is in a more safe way or why you have that need in the first place. Maybe the lights just need to be dimmed or maybe this noise just needs to be off. Or yeah, being curious is a definitely good start, isn't it? You've got some courses, haven't you, coming up. Do you want to explain a little bit about those, who they're for and how and who can access those?
Sure. We have an evaluation course that is for parents. I really kind of think about it in three ways because these are the most common that I hear. But one is that they're concerned about their child and the teacher isn't. And so how to kind of navigate that. If you're concerned about your kid and your teacher is also concerned, or if you're not concerned about your child and then the teacher is, right? And so those are kind of three spaces where I hear families get into kind of just a little bit of a roadblock around like, what do I do? How do I move forward? And there are opportunities for support and evaluation through the school. There's opportunities for evaluation through the medical model and potential supports there. You could do both, you could do neither. And so that can just feel like a lot of decision fatigue. And the course is really designed to walk parents through each of those kind of pathways. And there's also prototypes of different situations. So, learning disability versus autism. And you can go through and hear the profiles and the families and how they went through a decision making process and gives parents the same decision making process that they can use for themselves. And then there's also just a ton of resources. There's, a form letter that you can use. There's a note taking template when you go and meet with a doctor so that you can make sure that you get all the information. Because I don't know if you're anything like me and many parents that I've seen, they'll come and they'll have packets of paper and they're like, hold on, it's somewhere. Let me find, I think I saw a note here. And it kind of can help organize your thinking for you. We've had our own team members use some of the forms and things. Like they asked us after we made them to use them. So that felt like a good
Good.
sign that we're helpful. So that's available. I would say that that's a resource that's really for families that are kind of at the beginning of this journey where they're saying, like, maybe my kid needs something more. And then we also have some group parenting courses, sorry, just like group parenting workshops that are going to be running in January. And those are for middle schoolers and high schoolers. So kind of those middle grades. These, I feel like I keep hearing from so many families that they read the books, but a lot of the books are for younger kids who are neurodivergent, right? Or they're about teenagers in general, but not for the neurodivergent teen. And so this was really a hope to fill that need for people and give them a space to talk about the big things that are coming up for them and get resources. We talk about relationships, romantic relationships and friendships. We talk about technology, social media, ways to navigate that. We talk about getting ready for transitions and how to help our kids in the middle years kind of get ready for that whatever that next phase of life is, if they're going to continue to live at home but they're going to work, if they're going to go to some type of university, if they are going to go into the workforce, and how to help kind of prepare them in a way that doesn't feel like they're just being, kicked out of the nest, but really that they are ready. A lot of our parents have anxiety about their child being ready to leave home and what that looks like for them. And then they're also in this kind of place where it's like, I do all these things for my kid, I support my kid. And how do I transfer some of that onto them, but in a way that doesn't leave them feeling more overwhelmed, right?
Right. And weird transition for parents to get out of that role too. And what
Right.
that looks like, it's definitely a question I get asked all the time. It's so neat. I mean, God, the teenage years are so hard to navigate anyway, let alone if you have a neurodivergent child. So yeah, I can imagine that would be incredibly useful for so many parents. And where can they find more information on these things if it's of interest?
Sure. They can go to drmorganbeidleman.com. They can join our newsletter to see when the next round of groups come out, because we're going to do them one in January and we'll do one in March more than likely. And then we might do one in April. We're not going to do anything in May because May is a crazy, crazy month. And so really we want to be incredibly responsive to the needs of families. So if we get to the end of January and someone's like, I don't want to wait till March, can we do one in February? And we have enough interest, we'll do one in February also. And so, yeah, so if you're interested, like you can go to drmorganbeidleman.com. If you're at the beginning of this journey and you're trying to figure out evaluation, the course is also available there, and that you can buy at any time. And if you are further along, but you're like, those resources sound great, you could also just download the resources. I don't think that that would be great if you're brand new to the journey, because I think you'll get the resources and be like, what do I do?
Yeah, definitely. The least to overwhelm the better at that stage. There's so much, isn't there? Absolutely. I'll also leave any of your links and website in the description below this podcast, so it's easily findable for everybody.
Thank you.
Gosh, Morgan, I could talk to you for so long. We're gonna have to get you on again.
I was like, I would love to talk again. We didn't even get to talk teenagers.
No, maybe in the new year we can talk about neurodivergent teenagers, because that is a huge topic on its own. I really love talking to you about the neurodivergence in children and how to navigate that as a teacher, and actually having such accessible steps that are doable, manageable, affordable, that anybody can start today, and it will make a massive difference to all of the children in the class. And I think we have to start there. It makes sense that this conversation started there, because without that, how can we then support, developing children and teenagers? So yeah, I'm so grateful for this conversation, and I'm certainly taking a lot from it this week, and I hope everybody else is too, that's been listening.
Thank you. It's been such a joy talking with you. I could just keep blabbing.
I loved it. I know if people obviously can join your courses and see your website, but if people want to find you just to ask the odd question about what we've been talking about today too, I know I'll leave the stuff in the description below because they might want to reach out to you with a question. Is that okay?
Yes, please.
Just about
Please reach
anything.
out anytime. I also do professional development trainings.
Okay.
I do them all over the place, so happy to do that as well. And I do one-on-one coaching for neurodivergent teens and young adults. And so if that's something that somebody is interested in, and we have availability and our calendars align, like happy to support or refer to other people that might be a good fit.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Morgan. I'm so pleased that we've had this conversation today. And my homework, as well as everybody else listening, is going to be starting off with those 5 things. Can we name those things about all of our children that we support? I think that is a great start. Thank you, Morgan.
Thank you.